Hello everybody, I'm Alyssa from Untitled Astrology. Today we're going to walk through all of the astrology of the week of November 30th through December 6th. We have several things to talk about. Mercury goes direct, we have a full moon in the sign of Gemini, so we're going to get into all of that. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so that way we can walk through the week together astrologically each week. If you subscribe, you'll see notifications for our weekly meditations that we have every Sunday night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We gather here together to lean into the energies, to create personal relationships after going through all the astrology of the week through the video. If you follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram, there is a weekly intention that is released on Fridays that comes out ahead of the weekly video, and then you have all of that to come into your own personal contemplation before we meet together for the live meditation Sunday nights. So really looking to create a process and a way for you to create these personal relationships and personal conversations with the astrology. Bring it into your own personal life rather than just having these broad keywords that we can't maybe necessarily apply all of them. So a bit of a process and different ways to work with the energies and to lean into them and create conversations with them. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to get right into this week here. We start out on Sunday with a couple shifts. We start out with Venus moving into the sign of Sagittarius and Mercury stationing to go direct in the sign of Scorpio. So our Mercury retrograde is coming to an end and the planets are slowly making their way out of the sign of Scorpio here into the sign of Sagittarius. Mercury will make its way in there last. Mars and the Sun are already there. Venus is making her way, and then Mercury will make its way back into the sign of Sagittarius after going through that Grand Water Trine one more time here. So Venus entering the sign of Sagittarius. She enters that fiery domain of Jupiter. We've talked a lot about Jupiter with the Grand Water Trine through October and through November. So it's not that Jupiter is going to be going away because these planets are moving into Jupiter's domicile. We've had Mars there for quite a while. The Sun has ingressed recently. But Venus moving in there. There is this increase, potentially, of that enthusiastic, expansive energy of Sagittarius. Think about Jupiter. Jupiter expands. Jupiter wants to bring in knowledge and understandings and insights. It wants to understand. It wants to bring in all of the things. It wants to see the big picture, experience all of the things. Experience all of the things because it's Jupiter's fire sign. So there is that creative passion, there's that enthusiastic energy and the will and that assertiveness that can lead to an expressiveness, right? Fire desires to express. It desires to create. It desires to be authentic within its experiences. It's Jupiter. So there's there can be some optimistic type energy towards those experiences, or really just stepping fully into it, whether it's a positive experience or maybe even a little bit more of a heavier experience. Like, this is the energy we're going into, so we're going into it either way. That's the space that Venus is starting to step into. As she moves into the sign of Sagittarius, like I said, she's going to move into a space where she's co-present with the Sun and Mars. They're not going to conjoin in the sign of Sagittarius. They're going to conjoin early next year in the sign of Capricorn. So we're going to be revisiting these planets coming together. With them being co-present, they are working together, but maybe they're working together behind the scenes in some sort of way. Maybe our motivations have already started to come into this space. Our solar expression, our life purpose and our path and our soul level expression has already started to come into this space. Now Venus, our desires, where we want to bring harmony, our wants, maybe something to do with love and relationship, trying to find some sort of harmony, some sort of balance, but really the things that we desire are moving into this space. So maybe they're working on, since they are all going to come together here in just a little while, in January, it's like these three planets are starting to work together towards something that is going to start to shift, something that's going to start to change. Sagittarius is a mutable sign, so I'm thinking about that seasonal shift that comes with the mutable signs, right? Sagittarius is within the darkest portion of the year, but it's the sign that hands over the period of year where dark is increasing to where light slowly starts to increase. So once we get to 0 Capricorn, also known as the winter solstice moment, we have the darkest day of the year, but then slowly, gradually, the light starts to come back, and eventually you can start to see that. You can see that in the symbolism of both Sagittarius and Capricorn as well. So they're starting to work together. They're starting to work together to usher in some sort of shift, some sort of change. And then in Capricorn, they're going to initiate that change, and they're going to come together. So thinking about the Sagittarian and the Capricorn houses and how they where that mixing and intermingling is starting to show up here at the end of the year as well as the beginning of next year is a good contemplation for all of us here. As she moves into the sign of Sagittarius, I'm going to go ahead and put the chart up here so you can see it. You see the sun, or you see Venus here with the Sun and Mars in Sagittarius in the 7th house in this chart. If you look at the 10th house, you'll see that the planets in the sign of Sagittarius are coming into a square with the North Node, with Saturn, and with Neptune here. So the trines that we've had to these planets when planets were moving through the sign of Sagittarius, specifically that trine to Saturn, because it's part of that Grand Water Trine connecting with Jupiter as well. And Saturn was retrograde during this period where these trines came through. Maybe there was some sort of expanded foundational realm that's been working through here, right? Maybe there's been questions since during Saturn's retrograde period and with these trines, so you're thinking like through the summer into the early fall period, maybe there were some sort of questions that have formed, structures and patterns and adjustments that have been needed. Maybe we've started to notice where things are needing to shift in some sort of way. You know, Saturn is about impermanence, and it's about things falling away and death and decay, but letting things go in a way because they've already served their purpose. So looking at the foundations, looking at the frameworks, and letting go of what has already served its purpose. What could be decaying here? What could be kind of starting to let go? If the trine really expanded our perspective on these foundational boundary things and the structures, the real basic structures in our life with the Grand Water Trine, it really could have been showing us a lot about our emotional attachments to different structures and habits and forms within our lives of all kinds here. Where now that maybe that has been brought up into the psyche and into the awareness, now that we're reaching the position of the square, which gives us a challenge, gives us a place to grow from, it's the closing square. So think of like the 3rd quarter moon phase of a lunar cycle. This is where things really start to fall away. This is where the things that have served their purpose or are taking up space and cluttering start to fall away. And that's what Saturn does. Saturn pulls things away or has things fall away that are not serving their purpose and just they're not useful anymore, right? For whatever reason. Maybe we realize that they never were useful and they were blocking us or they were pinning us down in the way that Saturn can sometimes, or maybe they've served their purpose and now it's time to move on to some sort of new structure, new foundation that we can feel emotionally connected to. So this is the energy that these planets are starting to move towards as they are moving towards this square. If we think about these planets coming together in the sign of Capricorn early next year and initiating something, if you're going to start something new, there's something else that needs to fall away, right? There's something else that needs to come to an end, or at least to less of a focus. If you're going to start spending more time reading or initiating like a journaling practice, then whatever you were doing in those minutes before, whether it's sleeping or eating or, scrolling on your phone or working or whatever it may be, that process is coming to a close, or that time being spent there is coming to a close, so that way you can create something new. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was, not necessarily a good thing. Sleep is a good thing, but if you're going to get up 10 minutes earlier so that way you can journal, that's initiating a new good thing, but kind of constricting the other thing as well. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, right? So as Venus moves into the sign of Sagittarius, it feels like she could be coming from a space where if it's been emotionally taxing, if it's been It feels like there's been some stagnation. Venus in Scorpio is in a little bit of a difficult place for Venus. She's going to be looking deeply at the things that she wants and the things that she desires and the things that she really wants to cultivate. And some of those things can come with a little bit of difficulty. Moving into the sign of Sagittarius can feel like a pick-me-up. It can feel like we have kind of the wind at the back of our feet, and we are like ready to run forward again. But there's still some things that Venus and these other planets here are going to start to come into contact with. So it's interesting to think about how these are going to show up for us. So really looking at the structures and the forms that have shown themselves to us. We can go back to the beginning of Saturn's retrograde, which would bring us back to mid-July. And then we can focus mostly on October, November, and kind of what has been brought up into our sphere and into our psyche since then. So as Venus is shifting, Mercury is shifting as well. We have Mercury moving from the retrograde period into its direct position. So Mercury is now going to start to move its way back through those last few degrees of the sign of Scorpio. It's going to move back through that Grand Water Trine once more, and then it's going to join the other planets that are in the sign of Sagittarius. Going to really finish out this Scorpio energy that we have. So this is a turning point in the mercurial cycle. If we look at the beginning of the retrograde as an initiation or a seeding moment of the revision, of the reorganization and the rearranging of habits, of forms, of our mind and our thoughts and our processes, you know, things at the beginning of the retrograde, things can start to come up that we realize need to start to shift, and then they start to undergo a process slowly. There can be, the shift can come out of a bit of a chaos where it's like things just aren't quite computing, they're not quite working. That's where you get those beginning stationing points being a little bit louder in the retrograde period for some people than for others. And then we have the cazimi, where the sun comes into contact with Mercury, with that planet. We have that resetting moment. It goes from, in this position, it goes from the evening star phase into the morning star phase. So we get the real reset of the synodic cycle that starts there. And then the revision continues as the planet moves across the sun, continues to move backwards through the zodiac, and that revision continues. The rearranging continues. Now we reach the stationing point. Now that planet can start to move. Now Mercury starts to move forward. Now something might be a little more clear. There might be a little bit of clarity, more clarity than there was a couple weeks ago. So you start to see the path, you start to see the process, and you start to see a vision to be able to follow here. It's moving back towards that exact Grand Water Trine, leading towards the end of that Scorpio pile-up and emphasis, like we mentioned earlier. And the retrograde itself and what has been rearranging and reorganizing could be directly related to that Grand Water Trine and what has activated within you as far as water things go. And we can look at the beginning of this lunar cycle started with the Mercury cazimi, right? So this reinitiation, this synodic reset, and this starting something new has been built right into this lunar cycle. Mercury is stationing to go direct within the week of the full moon here. So there's a lot to do with Mercury's process and what it's doing within our mind related to the Grand Water Trine. And that's reemphasized here when Mercury is moving to go direct. At the time that Mercury stations to go direct, it's in the sign of Scorpio, so it's in Mars's sign. At the same time, the moon is in the sign of Aries, so it's also in Mars's sign. So feels like a real push to really move forward, especially if the water trine has stirred up some stagnation. Let it move. Let the water flow a little bit here, right? In the last several weeks, the last 2 months, we've been talking about this Grand Water Trine here. And we've talked a lot about like flowing versus stagnation. You can have a body of water where water is flowing and it's resourceful and you can collect water from there, and then you can have water that stagnates, water that collects dirt and muck and, you know, other impurities and things like that. Then you need to either stir it up or you need to get it flowing again. Those are the type of things that symbolically could have been going on for all of us. And then, yeah, we have Mercury changing direction within its cycle here. So that's where we start off the beginning of the week here with Here we go, with these shifts that we have. Then we have a couple days where there's not a whole lot going on. We move forward into Monday, December 1st, where we can go ahead and follow the moon around. And we also have a small little sextile between Venus and Pluto that's going on here on this day. Sextiles can be fast, especially with Venus and the speed that she's moving. They can be fast, they can be subtle, but this one is Pluto, so it can be powerful at the same time. If Venus in the sign of Scorpio has felt like she's had difficulty getting out of the trenches, I mentioned earlier about how Venus in Scorpio is not in its best position, then Venus in the fire may feel inspiring, it may feel uplifting, it may feel revitalizing. Fire purifies, right? Water accumulates. So whatever has been accumulating, kind of like I mentioned a moment ago, we can start to purify that. We can start to get those impurities out of there. As we start to move forward here. And this little sextile can help us with that. If you think about Pluto, Venus is connecting with that Lord of the Underworld here on the outset of her time in the sign of Sagittarius. So Pluto can represent power, strength. It can represent empowerment, but also that shadow material that can come up. Often the empowerment and the strength and the power comes from someplace down within, and it comes often from, with Pluto specifically, addressing that shadow power. Maybe there's something that we have to kind of acknowledge, and then we can kind of own it. We can move forward from it in some sort of way. Or, our deep-seated power of not feeling oppressed in some sort of way, right? Where we can be our full, authentic self. But a lot of times the shift and the change comes from recognizing things that are a little bit deeper with the sign of, or with the planet Pluto, things that might be a little bit unconscious, but that which needs to fall away by any means necessary. So I think about the purification of fire, right? It's going to incinerate it and it's going to be gone, just like that. That's kind of what Pluto can do. So the ability to purge, the ability to release and stand in that strength. I'm releasing this because it does not serve me well. I know that this isn't going to help me anymore, so I am going to release it. I have the power and the courage and the strength to take the steps to take me down the path that I want to. Very, very vague, but when Venus and Pluto come together, we can just have some courage to express our desires. And it's a fire sign, so there is some expressive, there is that desire to be authentic. And again, Venus in the sign of Scorpio might have been difficult for some people here. I'm thinking about the creative desires coalescing with the mental realm. Pluto's in the sign of Aquarius. It's an air sign. Venus is in the sign of Sagittarius. Again, a fire sign. So these ideas in the sign of Aquarius specifically can include some larger picture perspective, that 1,000-foot view that we can get in the sign of Aquarius. And sometimes within taking that large view, it can allow us to acknowledge our shadows while also finding our strengths and our powers, because we see all of it rather than just zoning in on just one. Saturn or Venus in the sign of Scorpio can be much more specific and much more dialed in to one thing. Now that we're in the sign of Sagittarius, we're in the place of Jupiter, we are talking about Pluto in the sign of Aquarius within this aspect. There might be a little bit broader, a little wider view where maybe it was a little bit narrow before, but that narrowness allows Scorpio to kind of dial in and focus and have some good things within itself here too. So that's what we have coming through on Monday. If we go ahead and move forward to Tuesday, December 2nd here, we will see that we don't have any exact lunar aspects. The moon will square Pluto, so we'll have a little bit more Pluto aspects going on there. And then if we go ahead and move forward into Wednesday here, we also don't have any exact aspects. Following the moon around, the moon will move into the sign of Gemini just before 10 p.m. Eastern time, and that's going to set us up for our full moon that we have coming through on Thursday. So if we go ahead and move forward from Wednesday into Thursday, that's where we have the full moon coming through at 13 degrees of Gemini. I have 6:13 p.m. Eastern time coming through here. Full moon in the sign of Gemini. The moon is in the sign of Gemini. The sun is in the sign of Sagittarius here, right? When I think about the full moon that comes through this time of year in the sign of Gemini every year, I think about questioning our beliefs. Sagittarius, being Jupiter's sign, has a lot to do with knowledge and understandings and bigger philosophies and perspectives, right? Seeing the whole picture, experiencing the whole picture. Gemini, on the other hand, is Mercury's sign. So this is the space of looking at small little details. This is the space of pulling things apart to understand all of the details. Maybe the sign of Sagittarius wants the cliff notes and it just wants to hear the important things so that way it can get like the broad picture, right? Gemini wants to look at all of the notes, read all of the text, but then it also wants to look at all of the notes in the back and look at the bibliography and like understand exactly where it all came from. Maybe it doesn't always have the attention span to get through the full bibliography, but it will hit the ones that it'll jump around and it'll look deeper into what piques its curiosity. Hopefully that analogy helps a little bit. So questioning those beliefs, looking at these bigger philosophical structures and frameworks, with Jupiter being in the sign of Cancer, it could be related to Cancer lunar themes, so it could have something to do with our own personal sphere and origins and, you know, our own emotional safety in some sort of way, memory body, things like that. But wanting to understand the small parts of a greater whole here. The full moon itself is of air and of fire, ideas, thoughts, drives, and motivations, but it's water toned because it's ruled by Jupiter, and Mercury and Jupiter are coming back into that Grand Water Trine. They're both in water signs right now. So it's of air and fire, it's of the mental realm and of the creative realm, right? So coming up with ideas and trying to find ways to put them into form, put them into action, and understanding the bigger context behind it. But there's an emotional tone to it. There is a connective tissue. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of fluidness. When we think about air, water, and fire, those are all mobile type signs or mobile elements. There's not a whole lot of earth. The only planet that we have in Earth right now is Uranus in the sign of Taurus. It's had some recent aspects, but it's not in exact aspect to anything at the time of the full moon here. So there's a lot of moving emotions that maybe we've been parsing through here lately, right? There's a lot of different moving parts within this full moon, and all of these little moving parts could be coming together in a height or a culmination. Again, this could be related to Cancerian type things or just water things in general. So family and origin is material. It comes up big and strong here. Our own emotional awareness and security. Relational things and our relationships with others, relationships with ourselves and our emotions, relations with the ways that we can, the places that we feel safe, finding a safe space to be able to grow from here. All of these things could be coming to a height or a culmination within the full moon. I'm thinking about the sage and the messenger coming together, the one that delivers the information as well as the information itself. Mercury is Hermes, right? Mercury is the messenger. It's the psychopomp that can move from the material world into the energetic world. We see that with Mercury changing its phase like it's doing this week more often than any other planets here. So there's a lot of moving, there's a lot of shifting here that's going on. The information itself, the message, is Jupiter. Both of these planets are going to be contacting each other at the end of this week as well here. So bringing a connection there that feels like the understanding or the all-encompassing understanding is starting to come together, right? We're starting to maybe get the message in some way, but maybe we want to dig a little deeper. Maybe we want to understand a little bit more details. Maybe there's other things left for us to still explore. Maybe there's some curiosity within what has been coming up here. With all of the understandings and all of the things that have been coming up for this exalted Jupiter in the sign of Cancer may really make us feel held, make us feel seen, make us feel safe enough to be able to move forward and whatever it is that we are exploring here, right? The new pathways that we are exploring, the emotional connections that have been coming up, and Jupiter's still working in the background. Right? We still have Mercury coming through this trine once more. Jupiter has been contacting all of these personal planets very directly through the trine. but it's still working in the background after the trine. So if the trine has brought up insights, brought up some sort of information, it feels like with it working in the background still, how are the insights becoming a part of us? Or how are we integrating them into the way we are moving, the way we are thinking, the way we are connecting with others now, right? The messages that have come, they're ones that are so deep and intimate that they're not going to leave us. They're going to stay right here. They're going to become a part of us. They're going to become integrated into our soul. That's water. Things that we feel so deeply that they become a part of us and they fuse right into us, right? Think about how water, it can just like you can take a sponge and you can absorb the water. We can be the sponge and the water can come into us, and the water can purify, it can fill us up, it can hydrate us. There's lots of different things that water can do, but it's life-giving and it's prolific. That's the thing, even if there's some difficult things that come through with it. And since the pinging point has been Scorpio, I've said this before recently, like there definitely could be some difficult things that have come up here. So this full moon coming up here feels like more moving parts. I'm thinking of like different gears that are moving together here, right? So we have Venus shifting into Sagittarius, we have Mercury stationing, changing its position, we have the full moon here, sign of Gemini, so it's Mercury's place here. There's a lot of shifting little points. So I'm thinking about different gears that when one moves, it pings another one and they start to kind of move there. So yeah, you can play with that symbolism and see how if that does anything good for you there. So that's what we have coming through Thursday. So the full moon, Gemini full moon coming through here. If we go ahead and move forward into Friday, we don't have any exact aspects here. That Gemini moon will move into the sign of Cancer just before 9 p.m. Eastern time. And then if we go ahead and move forward into Saturday here, we have the moon in the sign of Cancer all day. No exact lunar aspects, but we have Mercury moving into that exact trine with Jupiter here. So this is that last space. Let me go ahead and pull the chart up here so that way you all can see it. And I'm going to go ahead and move the chart forward by some days here so we can just get it to Saturday here. Okay, so Mercury is at 24 degrees of Scorpio. You can see that in the 6th house in this chart. And Jupiter is at 24 degrees of Cancer, right? The place that's been sitting for some time. Notice that Mercury is the only planet in the sign of Scorpio. We can see our visual here of Venus, Sun, and Mercury have all moved into the sign of Sagittarius. Remember, that is Jupiter's sign. So Jupiter is still working in the background with these planets. But this is the last activation of this Grand Water Trine. So that water rushing through one last time. I think it's really interesting that this process, this Grand Water Trine process, and I'm calling it a process because it's been activated and reactivated multiple times through this fall-autumn season. This process began with the mind and ended with the mind. Mercury was the first one to come through this Grand Water Trine space. Now through the retrograde period, it's the last one to come through. That feels significant to me. It started here. It started in the mental sphere and it ended in the mental sphere. So it started with something coming into our psyche, something coming into our awareness, and then our motivations, our ambitions, our ability to sever something and move in a different way. That's Mars came through. Sun, we felt it within us. We felt something start to shift. Maybe there's some sort of deep soul level purpose, or maybe it's just us wanting to be authentic or being able to express ourselves. Maybe it's feeling like we are going down the path wholly, whatever the solar expression is for you. Venus came through there. The desires, the needs, the want to bring balance and harmony. I need this. I want this. I desire this so much, right? Kind of like that. And now Mercury is coming through it, through the direct motion, one last time. As we see this water coming through here, I feel, since it started with Mercury, ended with Mercury, I feel like this is a cementing of the guidance, the insights, and the care that we have received while exploring these deep spaces, and the imprint that has left in our mind, right? The things that it makes us think about on a daily basis, the affirmations that it has put into our heads, right? The thoughts, the habits, the processes, the resources and the tools, those are also mercurial things that could be coming our way. The water trines, they bring up understandings of origin and relational paths, general expansion of the mind with Mercury and Jupiter coming through here, and really marrying that mental and emotional sphere. But this one may have a little more history, or at least an immediate focus. Water has history within its own right. Think about origins, think about our memory body. That all comes from experiences and something that has come before this time. So water can have history to it, but this one has some immediate history that we can feel, or a focus that it's had through October and through November here. So there's history, but it feels immediate. It feels something that's really close that we can grab onto, where just water in general, you start thinking about like ancestry and our memory body. That's not something that maybe is quite so easily accessed through the conscious mind. This is right there at our forefront here. So how can you implement or imprint what you have gained, right? How can you make it part of your mental sphere so that way it's always there, right? It's something that just becomes a part of you in some sort of way. So what you've gained, even what has served its purpose and has closed the book or maybe moved on to another chapter, how can you keep that with you as you move on? What are the stories, what are the understandings, what are the experiences that you've had that you can take with you as you step forward, as you continue to make this shift in the sign of Sagittarius, which is a mutable sign. Mercury is going to move in there next week, so we're going to have all these planets in the sign of Sagittarius, and then they're all going to come together in the sign of Capricorn. So they're shifting. They're starting to shift. Think about towards the end of the season, as there's like some days where you can't tell if it's fall, you can't tell if it's winter, right? It's kind of like that, where the shift is starting, but it hasn't been cemented. Then we get into the kind of Capricorn, okay, we're in the winter time. It's winter, right? We're not wondering what season it is anymore. We're not wondering where the change is going to be. We're not still trying to parse out all the details. This is the change. This is the direction that we're going. Kind of like that. So this Grand Water Trine space coming through this weekend, we will begin next week's video by talking about Mercury trining Saturn, because that technically happens the following day on Sunday, December 7th, but it's all happening here at the same time. Mercury's coming through this space where the water is rushing in, and the water is rushing in a way that, in its final way. Is it going to flood? Is it going to clear away the impurities? Does it make space for something new? Is it hydrating? Is it that plant that has felt dehydrated and you have forgotten to water, and then all of a sudden you take it and you submerge it into your sink, and all of its roots are able to soak up as much water as it needs and then leave behind what doesn't serve it? Cool opportunities and possibilities this week. Things moving, things flowing. I think movement and flowing breath is a good thing for this week, because it feels like there's lots of little shifting, moving pieces here going on. So if you want to talk about those shifting and moving pieces, join us for our live meditation, Sunday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We take the weekly intention. We talk about some of the aspects of the week, maybe look at them in a specific type way, and then we enter a meditative space. You create the conversation. You have the connection with how the astrology is shaping within your life. Where is the mirror? Where is that symbolic mirror that is trying to communicate with you and look at what is going on and reflect what is going on? Where are you given some place to reflect on? Those are the type of spaces that we enter Sunday night. So thank you for walking through this week with me. I hope everybody has a great day, a wonderful week, and I will see you all next week. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, follow Facebook, Instagram, and then, all the things. Take care. Have a great day. Bye.